After Jeļena Ostapenko lost to Taylor Townsend, the two exchanging sharp words, Townsend saying Ostapenko accusing her of having no class and no education.
Jeļena Ostapenko didn't just make headlines with her game, she ignited them with her actions. In a moment that stunned fans and players alike, the fiery Latvian abruptly grabbed the microphone from Taylor Townsend during what should have been a routine interview. The silence that followed was as deafening as the confrontation itself, and the cameras caught every second of the chaos. How did the tennis world react when this footage resurfaced? Stay tuned, because the reactions might surprise you. The clash between Jeļena Ostapenko and Taylor Townsend. Now, before diving into what unfolded with the post-match drama, it's important to rewind to the sparks that set the whole situation in motion. Because truthfully, this story didn't begin with microphones. It began with a match that was supposed to follow the script, but ended up tearing it apart. It was the second round of the US Open, and all eyes were on Jeļena Ostapenko, the fiery Latvian whose 2017 French Open triumph had stamped her name in tennis history. Seeded 25th, she entered the tournament as a favorite expected to cruise past early opponents. But across the net stood Taylor Townsend, an American player better known for her doubles achievements, unseeded in singles, yet brimming with grit and belief. On paper, the match leaned heavily in Ostapenko's favor. Reality had other plans. From the very first exchanges, the contrast between the two couldn't have been starker. Townsend looked calm, steady, and purposeful, striking with clean precision and commanding the rallies. Ostapenko, meanwhile, seemed unsettled. Every close line call drew exaggerated expressions. Every missed shot invited visible frustration. Her body language told a story long before the score did. This wasn't the dominant, confident player the tennis world was used to seeing. Instead, it felt like she was fighting herself as much as her opponent. Then came the flashpoint, the moment that sent the temperature on court soaring. In the second set, Townsend struck a ball that kissed the top of the net and dropped just over, winning her the point. In tennis culture, that's seen as a lucky break, and players often raise a hand to acknowledge it. Townsend didn't. She simply celebrated the point, lost in the flow of the match. For most, it was nothing worth noticing. For Ostapenko, it was a personal affront. Her glare said it all, her jaw tight, her gestures sharp, her anger mounting with every heartbeat. From there, Townsend's momentum only grew. She dictated play, kept her composure, and ultimately secured the upset victory with a commanding 7-5, 6-1 scoreline. The crowd erupted, thrilled at the Americans' triumph, but the energy between the players was far from celebratory. At the net, instead of a standard handshake and quick words of respect, Ostapenko unleashed her fury. She accused Townsend of having no class, even going as far as calling her uneducated for not apologizing on that net cord point. And according to Townsend, Ostapenko didn't stop there. She added a remark about seeing what happens outside the US, a statement that sounded less like frustration and more like a veiled warning. The cameras captured every second. Ostapenko's reputation for fiery outbursts wasn't new, but this moment hit differently because of the layers behind it. Here was a former Grand Slam champion unraveling in public, while an underdog not only outplayed her, but stood firm against the emotional storm. The storyline practically wrote itself. Townsend had scored the win of her career, while Ostapenko turned what could have been a routine loss into a headline-sparking controversy. And although she didn't actually snatch a microphone to deliver one last, fiery word, the scene was so charged that many fans believed she easily could have. It felt entirely within her character. What played out was more than just a tennis match. It was the collision of ego, pride, and unfiltered emotion under the spotlight of one of the sport's biggest stages. But was Ostapenko's remark just frustration? Or did it reveal something far deeper? Keep watching to find out. The fallout. After the Ostapenko-Townsend match. The real storm erupted not during the rallies, but once the match was over. Taylor Townsend, fresh from her upset victory, stepped into her post-match interview with the same composure she'd shown on court. Instead of firing back at Jeļena Ostapenko's harsh words, she offered perspective. "Losses hurt," she explained, "and sometimes emotions spill over." Her calm explanation seemed measured, but beneath that grace, the sting of Ostapenko's insult lingered. Being called uneducated, especially as a black woman in a sport still dominated by white athletes, cut far deeper than a casual remark. The wider tennis world immediately picked up on this. Naomi Osaka, herself no stranger to pressure or criticism, didn't mince words. She made it clear that calling a black player uneducated carried a heavy and unacceptable weight. For her, it wasn't just an insult tossed in the heat of competition. It was a line that should never be crossed. Osaka also reminded everyone that Townsend was one of the hardest working and most intelligent players on tour, a professional who had earned respect through determination and resilience. Even players who typically avoid controversy couldn't stay silent. Aryna Sabalenka, known for her careful diplomacy, stepped in with a subtle but telling observation. She described Ostapenko as someone who can be friendly, but often loses control of her emotions. It was a polite way of acknowledging that what happened was more than just a slip. It was a serious lapse in judgment. Meanwhile, Ostapenko herself tried to reframe the narrative. Taking to social media, she insisted her anger had nothing to do with race or education, but with what she viewed as broken etiquette. She claimed that Townsend had ignored an unwritten rule by not apologizing for a net cord winner, saying it was the first time in her entire career that someone had refused the gesture. To her, it wasn't about the point itself, but about a supposed lack of sportsmanship, and she argued that playing in front of a home crowd shouldn't excuse it. But her defense rang hollow to many. To lash out at an opponent's character over something as trivial as an unacknowledged lucky shot only made her appear out of touch. The attempt to paint herself as the offended party instead of addressing the weight of her words felt tone-deaf, especially as her comments reverberated across the sport. So was this really about a net cord apology, or a cover for something far more damaging? Stick around. The fallout tells its own story. When Ostapenko's words sparked a bigger storm, it wasn't the scoreline that made headlines after the match. It was the fallout that refused to die down. Taylor Townsend had delivered the performance of her career, yet what lingered was not just her victory, but the sting of Jeļena Ostapenko's words. Instead of celebrating her win, Townsend was left fielding questions about being called uneducated, a comment that carried weight far beyond the boundaries of sport. Fans didn't hesitate to voice their opinions, and within hours, the debate spilled across social media. A few sympathized with Ostapenko's frustration, pointing to the unwritten traditions of tennis and the expectation of acknowledging a net cord point. But most weren't buying it. The consensus was clear. Tennis etiquette could never justify a personal attack. When anger boils over into insults, the conversation stops being about fairness and starts being about respect, or the lack of it. What complicated the situation further was how Townsend chose to handle it. She could have fired back with her own sharp words, but instead, she remained calm, acknowledging that players sometimes say things in the heat of the moment. Yet, her composure couldn't hide the deeper cut. For a black woman in a predominantly white sport, being told she lacked education wasn't just careless. It touched on painful stereotypes that have existed for generations. That context changed everything, and the tennis world took notice. Naomi Osaka, who had faced her own share of scrutiny on and off the court, was among the first to speak out. She condemned the remark, stressing that labeling a black player as uneducated was one of the most damaging things someone could say in this sport. Aryna Sabalenka, usually careful with her words, admitted that while Ostapenko could be friendly, her emotions often got the better of her. In other words, even her peers couldn't defend what had been said. As the backlash intensified, Ostapenko attempted to clarify her remarks with a statement on Instagram. She claimed that English wasn't her first language, and insisted she had been referring only to tennis etiquette. But the explanation fell flat. She didn't name Townsend directly, nor did she acknowledge the weight her words carried. To many, it looked less like an apology and more like a scramble to contain the damage. Meanwhile, Townsend let her tennis do the talking. She knocked out 5th seed Mira Andreeva in her next match and pushed through to the 4th round, the deepest run of her singles career at a Grand Slam. In doubles, she and Katerina Siniakova continued to dominate, turning the spotlight back on her achievements. What made this episode unforgettable wasn't just one heated exchange, it was how it exposed the cracks beneath the surface of the sport. From cultural differences about etiquette to the racial undertones embedded in careless words, Ostapenko's outburst became much more than a moment of frustration. It became a mirror reflecting larger conversations that women's tennis could no longer ignore. Pressure on the court. The sharp contrast between the two players became one of the most striking storylines of the tournament. While Jeļena Ostapenko withdrew into silence, skipping press duties, avoiding social media, and making an early exit from doubles, Taylor Townsend seemed to grow louder with her performance. With each match, her game sharpened, her confidence swelling as the crowd rallied behind her. The more support she received, the stronger she appeared, almost as if the chaos had carved out a new edge in her play. Ostapenko, however, left behind more questions than answers. Why did a competitor so fierce suddenly fade from the spotlight? Her reaction hinted at more than just frustration over a single incident. Professional tennis, after all, is rarely just about serves and volleys. The athletes are constantly uprooted, traveling from city to city, carrying the crushing weight of expectations from coaches, sponsors, and fans. Every stumble feels magnified under relentless scrutiny, and the loneliness of being far from family only deepens the strain. It doesn't excuse her behavior, but it offers a glimpse into the pressure cooker these players live in. A minor spark, a disagreement, a tense moment on court can ignite emotions that have been building for weeks. Townsend turned hers into fuel. Ostapenko seemed consumed by it. And somewhere in that contrast lies a truth about the game. The fiercest battles are not always played across the net, but inside the minds of those holding the racket. A tournament of rivalries and redemption. This year's US Open has felt less like a tournament and more like a grand stage where every storyline seemed larger than life. Few moments captured this better than the collision between Carlos Alcaraz and Jannik Sinner. For months, their rivalry has been building into something unforgettable, and New York became the perfect backdrop for another chapter. Alcaraz, just 22 years old, once again proved he thrives when the lights are brightest. With his mix of precision and flair, he outlasted Sinner in 4 sets 6-2, 3-6, 3-6-1, 6-4 to secure not only his second US Open trophy, but also his return to the world #1 spot. What makes this battle so magnetic is that Sinner is hardly a player fading into the background. In fact, 2025 has been a year of remarkable consistency for him. He reached all 4 Grand Slam finals, a feat so rare it speaks to his endurance and mental toughness. Yet time and again, Alcaraz found a way to disrupt his momentum. Their encounters, 3 Grand Slam finals in a single season, hark back to the golden rivalries of tennis, injecting fresh energy into the men's game at a time when it desperately needed new faces at the top. Meanwhile, Novak Djokovic, at 38, reminded the world why he remains a marvel of longevity. A semi-final run at this stage of his career would be considered enough for most, yet Djokovic came within touching distance of a record-breaking 25th Grand Slam. Though Alcaraz denied him that milestone, his presence in the latter rounds still underscored the depth of greatness across generations. On the women's side, the drama unfolded in an equally compelling way. Aryna Sabalenka defended her title with a powerful display, defeating Amanda Anisimova 6-3, 7-6. It marked the first time since Serena Williams in 2013 that a woman captured back-to-back US Open victories. Sabalenka's rise has been fascinating. Once known primarily for raw strength paired with inconsistency, she has reshaped her game with composure and mental resilience, turning potential into dominance. But perhaps the most emotional story belonged to Anisimova. After stepping away from the sport to confront anxiety and depression, her return to the big stage felt like a triumph of its own. Reaching her first Grand Slam final since that break carried a weight that went far beyond the scoreboard. Even in defeat, she stood as a symbol of how the conversation around mental health in sports has shifted. What's striking is how this openness reflects a broader change. Unlike earlier generations, today's athletes are challenging the silence surrounding psychological struggles. They are learning to step back, heal, and then come back stronger. A narrative that has made this year's US Open about far more than trophies alone. So is tennis now defined as much by resilience as results? Stay tuned. The doubles drama reveals more. US Open doubles drama and breakthrough moments. What often gets overlooked at the US Open is how thrilling the doubles side of the tournament can be, and this year proved just that. Taylor Townsend, carrying the weight of earlier controversies, managed to channel her energy into a remarkable run with Katarina Siniakova. Together, they pushed their way into the women's doubles final, a stage that many thought Townsend might never reach so soon after the storm of attention she faced. Though Gabriela Dabrowski and Erin Routliffe ultimately edged them out, the achievement of making it that far only strengthened Townsend's standing as both a fighter and an inspiration. On the men's side, the spotlight landed on Joe Salisbury and Neil Skupski of Great Britain as they clashed with the formidable Spanish-Argentine duo of Marcel Granollers and Horacio Zeballos. What unfolded was a marathon filled with razor-thin margins, ending in a dramatic 3-6, 7-6, 7-5 victory for Granollers and Zeballos. The intensity of that match reminded fans why doubles deserves more attention. Its pace, precision, and unpredictability create a theater all of its own. But the biggest shift came not from the traditional doubles draws, but from a bold experiment in mixed doubles. This year, organizers introduced an exhibition-style format that paired current singles stars with doubles specialists. Suddenly, names like Iga Świątek and Casper Ruud were stepping into a category often ignored by the wider audience. Though they fell to defending champions Sara Errani and Andrea Vavasori, the spectacle reignited debate. Fans loved the star power and the buzz it created, but doubles purists argued it sidelined athletes who have spent entire careers mastering that craft. Beyond all of this, another story quietly stole hearts: wheelchair tennis. Tokido Oda's triumph in men's singles highlighted just how extraordinary this discipline has become. His mobility, creativity, and shot-making drew gasps from those lucky enough to witness it, serving as a reminder that tennis excellence is not confined to one format or one stage. So is tennis evolving beyond trophies into a test of values and character? Keep watching. The fallout makes the answer clearer. Beyond the baseline, lessons from the US Open. Looking at this year's US Open, it wasn't just the thunderous rallies or the glittering trophies that defined the fortnight. It was the conversations that spilled far beyond the court. The drama between Jeļena Ostapenko and Taylor Townsend became more than a clash of tempers. It turned into a mirror, reflecting the deeper questions professional tennis faces in an increasingly global arena. How much weight should etiquette carry in a sport where players come from vastly different cultures? What responsibilities do athletes shoulder when every word, gesture, and emotion is dissected by millions in real time? The exchange between the two players, raw and uncomfortable as it was, revealed the fragile line athletes walk between competition and character. Ostapenko's sharp remarks cut deeper than she may have intended, while Townsend's calm resilience highlighted a different kind of strength. Instead of retreating, she transformed the sting of criticism into momentum, drawing energy from the chorus of fans and fellow players rallying behind her. In doing so, she delivered some of the best tennis of her career, reminding the world that true toughness often shows itself in grace under fire. The ripple effect was striking. Naomi Osaka, Aryna Sabalenka, and others spoke out, not simply to defend a peer, but to challenge the culture of silence that often surrounds disrespect in sports. Their responses underscored a growing awareness that tennis is more than a solitary game played between white lines. It's a stage where issues of race, respect, and representation are constantly in play. That sense of community, so often hidden beneath the facade of rivalry, came alive in the wake of the controversy. Yet the discussion didn't stop there. Mental health, long whispered about in locker rooms but rarely addressed openly, became part of the narrative. Ostapenko's fiery outburst, though indefensible, invited questions about the unrelenting pressures of life on tour. Endless travel, the weight of expectation, and the loneliness of competing week after week create an environment where emotions often spill over. The sport's glittering surface masks a demanding reality, one that tests not just physical stamina, but emotional resilience. While these debates raged, the on-court brilliance was impossible to ignore. Carlos Alcaraz reclaimed the men's title, displaying a versatility and maturity far beyond his 22 years, while Aryna Sabalenka etched her name alongside Serena Williams as the only women in over a decade to win back-to-back U.S. Open crowns. These triumphs, dazzling in their own right, ran parallel to the deeper reckonings shaping the tournament's legacy. For Townsend, the fortnight became a defining chapter, proof that setbacks can be fuel, and that support from a community can turn personal battles into collective victories. For Ostapenko, the path ahead is less certain. Her brief apology may have opened the door, but only consistency, humility, and changed behavior can begin to rebuild trust in an era where social media ensures nothing is ever forgotten. This U.S. Open reminded us that tennis is never just about forehands and backhands. It is about identity, resilience, and the way a global sport reflects the challenges of the modern world. In New York, the brilliance of champions and the raw flaws of human behavior collided, leaving behind not just memories of epic matches, but questions that the sport will carry into every tournament to come. So, what do you think? Was the Ostapenko-Townsend drama handled fairly by the tennis world, or did it expose deeper issues in the sport? We'd like to hear your thoughts. Don't forget to like and subscribe.